this is an amazing, in substantial terms, an amazing beginning in the poem, because Dante meets Cato, whom he defines. We are being told there that he's an old man, a pagan, and a suicide. There are traits that Virgil singles out, and obliquely referring to his adventures, and that clearly contradict the world of purgatory. Because the world of purgatory is a Christian canticle. This is Easter Sunday. Why have it inaugurated by the presence of a pagan who knew nothing of the incarnation? Why have it? It's the realm of a renewed life. Why start it with a suicide? Someone who, we saw what Dante thought of the suicides in a complicated way throughout Inferno. There were a number of suicides inhabiting various aspects of various regions of hell, but especially among with the violence against nature in Inferno 13. And so an old man, a suicide, and a pagan. Why does he do this? A figure that he draws out of the world of Lucan. What we are told about him is usually whenever you have representations of the beyond, you always have a young man, for instance, juvenis. For instance, this is a character, the Latin term meaning a young. In Alain Delille, for instance, there is always a young man or a young woman welcoming to indicate the renewed life, no? The novelty, the freshness of a life. You certainly don't have an old man, and you certainly do not have a suicide. Now, the question of the suicide is probably the easiest to determine, because Cato's suicide is a suicide for freedom. And let me say a couple of things about freedom, because it's, I call purgatory really the domain of freedom. It's really the place of freedom. That he begins here explaining as it were a political but also moral state. It's a political because it's a refusal of the disarray and chaos brought in by the war between Pompey, brought in by the war between Pompey and Caesar at the time of the Civil War. But it is also a moral state because Cato decides to put an end to his life in a sort of sacrificial move, as if to draw attention to the way in which the state had been killed, had been destroyed by the rivalry between these two great figures who have not opposed, but have a rivalry about power. But freedom is the fundamental problem. It's a Roman issue, let me just say. Dante wants us to think of it at the very beginning of Purgatorio in pagan intellectual terms. Freedom. The whole Purgatory ends up with the pilgrim regaining and being crowned, as he'll say, with the attainment of free will. So the whole poem really moves this idea of from Cato's search for freedom, quest for freedom, and the pilgrim attainment of free will. Now, there is an obvious relationship to begin with between freedom on the one hand and I would say the future on the other, right? The poem begins with the future, and now we are going to be said what is a virtue of the future. You cannot conceive of freedom unless you have an idea of the future. You cannot conceive, you understand the connection between the two? You cannot conceive of a novelty unless you have an idea of the future and unless you have an idea of freedom. The notion of originality is actually, even poetic originality, is impossible unless it's tied to a certain idea of freedom. It presupposes them all, so that the attainment of freedom really means poetic originality, idea of the future, the notion that things can be different. If I am a slave to the past, if I'm a slave to a political order, if I'm a slave to my own vices, as internalized as that quest can be, then I really have no freedom. Cato embodies one who refuses living, if living means living in a state of tyranny to civil war, violence, and therefore to the impossibility of a moral life. Okay, so that's easy to determine, that's easy to explain. I even think that the notion of the old man can be explained. Dante wants to draw our attention, first of all, that somehow this search for the future it's not an alternative to the past. It grows out of the past. So that he's rejecting the idea that there may be some sharp distinction between the two, and that the seeds of the future are already contained in the past. A figure such as an old man, Cato. The third problem is the question of his being a pagan. And this brings me back to that which is the project, Dante's project in Purgatorio. The project is that he must make a careful distinction, which St. Augustine could not make in the City of God. Dante will make it. That's Dante's target, polemical target. Augustine really distinguishes between the earthly city and the heavenly city. And the heavenly city may live on earth, but it's really a pilgrim church going on toward the beatitude and the encounter with God. The earthly city is corrupt and in many ways not assimilable to the world of the redemption. This is if you are an Augustinian and you have very subtle view of Augustine, it may strike you as crude, but I don't think that it really violates the essence of that dual idea between the earthly city and the heavenly city. Dante is literally talking against the Augustinian dualism. There is in nature, there is within the pagan, secular, historical world, there are seeds that can become crucial for the making of the political, for the making of a new moral life that will be really consonant with, not dissonant with, in accord with the redemption and the Christian redemption that he will be actually seeking.